this 1910 wedding portrait, the bride's veil hides more than her face. The wedding portrait emerged from a cardboard box at an estate sale in Philadelphia, wrapped in yellowed newspaper from 1952. Sarah Mitchell, an antique dealer specializing in Victorian and Edwardian photography, almost missed it. She was cataloging the contents of a row house in South Philadelphia, one of those narrow brick buildings that had witnessed a century of immigrant families, births, deaths, and secrets. The photograph was formal, rigid in the way all wedding portraits from 1910 appeared. A bride and groom stood before a painted backdrop of Roman columns and heavy drapery. The groom stood tall and stern, perhaps in his mid-40s, wearing a dark suit with a high-starched collar and a thick mustache. His hand rested possessively on the bride's shoulder, but it was the bride who captured Sarah's attention immediately. The veil was unusually heavy, made of thick lace that completely obscured her face. Most bridal veils from that period were lighter, designed to suggest modesty while still allowing the bride's features to be visible. This veil was different, deliberately opaque, creating an impenetrable barrier between the bride and the camera. Sarah held the photograph up to the afternoon light. Even with illumination from behind, she could barely make out the shape of the bride's face. What she could see was troubling. The bride appeared small, almost childlike in stature, particularly compared to the groom's substantial frame. Her posture was rigid, shoulders drawn inward. Her hands were clasped tightly together, not in peaceful prayer, but in desperate tension. Sarah turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded ink, Mr. Robert Howard and bride, March 12, 1910, Castellano Studio, South Street. No name for the bride, just bride. Sarah had examined thousands of vintage wedding photographs in her 15 years as a dealer. She knew the conventions, the poses, the expressions, but something about this image felt wrong. The unnamed bride, the obscuring veil, the visible size difference, the groom's possessive stance. Together, they suggested a story that made Sarah deeply uncomfortable. That evening, in her apartment in Queen Village, she scanned the image in high resolution and began to research. What she would discover would reveal a secret hidden for 114 years. Sarah spent hours manipulating the digital image, using photo editing software to enhance shadows and highlights. Modern technology could reveal details invisible to the naked eye. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to see through the layers of lace. The bride's face emerged in fragments. First, the shape of her jaw, narrow, delicate, decidedly young. Then the curve of her cheek, still carrying the softness of adolescence. Her nose was small, her chin pointed. This was not a woman in her 20s. This was a girl, possibly as young as 14 or 15. But it was the moisture on her cheeks that made Sarah's stomach turn. Even through the heavy veil, even across 114 years, the evidence was unmistakable. The bride had been crying when this photograph was taken. Tear tracks ran down her face, disappearing into the high lace collar of her wedding dress. Sarah sat back from her computer screen, feeling physically ill. In 1910, child marriage was legal across most of the United States. In Pennsylvania, girls as young as 12 could marry with parental permission. It was not uncommon for poor families, particularly immigrant families struggling with debt, to marry daughters to older, financially stable men. But acceptance didn't make it right, and the crying girl in this photograph clearly hadn't accepted anything. Sarah began searching historical records with renewed urgency. She started with the name Robert Howard, cross-referencing marriage records from Philadelphia in March 1910. After 2 hours of searching, she found it. Marriage license issued March 10, 1910. Robert James Howard, age 43, occupation, textile merchant. Bride, Miss Rose Castellano, age 15, occupation, nun. Parent, guardian consent provided by Giuseppe Castellano, father. Rose Castellano, 15 years old. The same surname as the photography studio where the wedding portrait was taken. Sarah's heart sank. The photographer had documented his own daughter's wedding, or more accurately, her sale to a man nearly 3 times her age. She searched for Giuseppe Castellano. City directories listed him as operating the photography studio starting in 1905. Newspaper archives revealed he had emigrated from Sicily in 1898. In 1909, several notices appeared regarding legal actions against Giuseppe Castellano for unpaid debts, totaling nearly $800, an enormous sum. The debts disappeared from public records after March 1910. The same month, Rose married Robert Howard. Sarah contacted the Philadelphia Historical Society. A historian named Dr. Marcus Chen specialized in immigration history and agreed to meet her. When she showed him the wedding portrait and the records she'd compiled, his expression darkened. This pattern was unfortunately common, Marcus said, examining the photograph. Italian immigrant families in South Philadelphia faced enormous economic pressure in the early 1900s. Giuseppe Castellano arrived with skills. Photography was a respectable trade, but establishing a business required capital he probably didn't have. He pulled up documents on the library's computer. Giuseppe took out a loan in 1907 from a private lending operation connected to local organized crime. These weren't formal banks. They operated outside legal frameworks, which meant when borrowers couldn't pay, the consequences were severe. Severe how? Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew. Physical violence was one option, but a more elegant solution was accepting alternative forms of payment. Marcus gestured to the photograph. Giuseppe had a daughter of marriageable age. Robert Howard was a successful textile merchant, recently widowed, with significant capital. For men like Howard, marrying a young bride from an immigrant family offered certain advantages. A wife trained in domestic duties, likely to be obedient, too young to have contrary opinions. Sarah felt nauseous. So Giuseppe essentially sold his daughter to pay his debts. Not in those terms, of course. It would have been framed as an advantageous match, securing Rose's future. The dowry system worked in reverse. Instead of Giuseppe paying Howard, Howard paid Giuseppe's creditors directly. Marcus zoomed in on the digital image. The heavy veil is significant. Most photographers wanted to showcase the bride's beauty, but Giuseppe chose to obscure his daughter's face completely. He knew what he was documenting. The veil wasn't about modesty. It was about hiding the evidence. The 1910 census, taken 1 month after the wedding, showed Robert and Rose Howard living in a substantial home in Rittenhouse Square. The household included 2 servants. Rose's occupation was listed as wife, but Sarah couldn't stop staring at the girl in the photograph. 15 years old, crying beneath a veil meant to hide her tears. Her own father behind the camera, capturing evidence of the transaction he'd just completed. "I need to find out what happened to her," Sarah said quietly. Sarah spent the following week piecing together fragments of Rose's life from census records and newspaper archives. What emerged was a portrait of silence, a woman who existed in official records but left almost no trace of her own voice. She found Robert Howard's obituary from 1936. He had died at 69 of heart failure, described as a pillar of Philadelphia's textile industry. The obituary listed survivors: his beloved wife Rose, children Robert Jr., Catherine and Joseph, and 7 grandchildren. No mention of the 28-year age difference or that Rose had been a child bride. Rose herself lived longer. Sarah found her death certificate from 1967. She had died at 72. The informant was her daughter Catherine. Sarah tracked down Catherine's descendants through genealogical databases. Eventually, she found a woman named Lisa Morrison living in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, Rose's great-granddaughter. Sarah composed a careful email explaining her research. The response came 2 days later. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm stunned by what you've uncovered. My family never spoke about my great-grandmother Rose's early life. We knew she married young, but not how young. Can we meet? I have some of Rose's belongings that might help. Sincerely, Lisa Morrison." They met at a cafe in Center City, Philadelphia. Lisa brought a small wooden box, clearly old and carefully maintained. "This was my great-grandmother's," Lisa explained. "My grandmother Catherine gave it to me before she died. She said, 'Your great-grandmother kept her whole life in this box, but she never let anyone look inside. Maybe someday someone will be brave enough to read what she couldn't say out loud.'" Lisa opened the box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in Italian and English on thin paper. There was also a small photograph, a candid shot of a young girl, perhaps 13, smiling genuinely at the camera. "That's Rose," Lisa said softly. "Before the wedding, before everything changed." Sarah picked up one of the letters, written in careful English. "Mama, I do not want to marry Mr. Howard. Please tell Papa I will work. I will help in the studio. I will do anything. Please do not make me do this. I am afraid. He is so old. Mama, please." Lisa spread more letters across the cafe table, handling them carefully. "I found these after my grandmother Catherine died. They were hidden beneath a false panel in the box." Sarah picked up another letter, dated February 1910, 1 month before the wedding. "Dear Mama, Papa told me today that I must marry Mr. Howard on March 12th. I cried and begged him to change his mind. He said our family will lose everything if I do not do this. He said Mr. Howard is a good man who will provide for me. But Mama, I saw Mr. Howard yesterday when he came to the studio. He looked at me the way men look at women they are buying. I am 15 years old. I want to go to school. I want to become a teacher. Instead, I will become a wife to a man I do not love, do not know, and am afraid of. Is this what being a daughter means? Sacrificing everything so Papa's business can survive?" Sarah's eyes stung with tears. Lisa was openly crying now. "There are more," Lisa said, pulling out a stack tied with faded ribbon. "These were written after the marriage, but Rose never sent them. The first was dated March 15th, 1910, 3 days after the wedding. I am Mrs. Robert Howard now. I live in a house with more rooms than I can count. Robert expects me to manage the household, to entertain his business associates, to act as if I am a grown woman. But I am not a grown woman. I am a girl playing dress-up in someone else's life. At night, I cry into my pillow where no one can hear. The veil at my wedding was thick because I was crying. Papa knew if anyone saw my face in the photograph, they would see the truth. So he hid me behind lace, just as he has hidden the truth behind respectability." Marcus had joined them at Sarah's invitation. He read through several letters. "These are incredibly valuable historical documents," he said quietly. "They provide direct testimony of the emotional experience of child marriage from the bride's perspective. That's almost unheard of." Sarah picked up one of the final letters, dated December 1914. "I have 3 children now. I am 20 years old and I feel ancient. Sometimes I look at my daughter and think about what her life will be like. Will Robert arrange her marriage to some old man? I cannot let that happen. But I am so tired. Robert takes what he wants from me. I have no say in my own body, my own life." The envelope from 1950 was sealed, the glue long dried and cracked. Lisa carefully opened it and pulled out several pages covered in Rose's handwriting. Older now, more confident, but still recognizably hers. Sarah read aloud. "I am writing this in 1950, 40 years after my wedding. Robert has been dead for 14 years. For the first time in my adult life, I am free to think my own thoughts, speak my own words, make my own decisions. I have decided to write down the truth while I still have clarity and courage. I was sold. Let me be clear about that word, because for 40 years I have used softer language. Arranged marriage, family obligation, securing my future. But none of those phrases capture what actually happened. My father owed money to dangerous men. I was 15 years old. Robert Howard was 43. My father negotiated a transaction. Robert paid my father's debts, and in exchange, he received me. I was property transferred from one man's ownership to another. The law permitted it. Society accepted it. The church blessed it. But it was still a sale. Lisa's hands trembled as she turned the page. People ask me if my marriage was happy. What a strange question. Happiness requires choice, and I had none. Was I miserable every moment? No. Robert provided financial security. My children were healthy. I was never physically beaten, though there are many forms of violence that leave no visible marks. I learned to perform the role of grateful wife. I smiled at dinner parties. I bore 4 children and raised them with love. but underneath was always the knowledge that I had been stolen from myself at 15 years old. Marcus leaned forward. She's using the language of property and ownership explicitly, naming what happened to her. That's extremely rare for women of her generation. The letter continued. I want my descendants to know this truth because I see patterns repeating in subtler forms. This is how trauma echoes across generations. I am writing this down so future generations will understand where these patterns began. My father was desperate. Desperate people do terrible things. But desperation does not erase harm. I forgave my father before he died, but forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. This happened. It shaped every day of my life, and it must be remembered so it will not happen again. Lisa pulled out another document, a journal with a worn leather cover. This belonged to my grandmother Catherine, Rose's daughter. I think Catherine wanted someone to understand how it affected the next generation. The journal began in 1945, when Catherine was 31. Sarah read aloud. Mother has been acting strangely lately. She sits for hours looking at old photographs, particularly her wedding portrait. I asked her about it yesterday and she started crying, deep, wrenching sobs. She said, "You don't know what that day was like. You can't see my face in that photograph, and that's exactly what your grandfather intended." I didn't understand. I pressed her and she told me everything. My grandfather Giuseppe sold my mother. That's the word she used, sold. I feel sick. My entire understanding of our family history was built on lies. Marcus leaned back. Catherine is processing intergenerational trauma. She's realizing the family narrative she inherited was sanitized. Sarah turned the page. I have been thinking about my own marriage. I married Thomas when I was 22. I thought I was making a free choice, but now I wonder how free I really was. Mother pushed me toward Thomas, made it clear she would be disappointed if I didn't accept his proposal. She never told me about her own marriage, never warned me. Was she trying to give me something better? Or was she unconsciously recreating patterns, pushing me into marriage because that's what she learned? The journal continued through the late 1940s. In 1952, Catherine wrote, I asked Mother today if she ever loved Father. She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, I learned to love him in the way you learn to love a cage that at least has a comfortable bed and regular meals. I loved him for not being worse than he could have been. Is that love? I don't know. I don't know what to do with this information. My father died when I was 16. I remember him as kind, generous. Mother never showed us anything but respect for him. The performance was seamless. Lisa wiped her eyes. My grandmother once told me, marriage is complicated in ways young people can't understand. I thought she was being mysterious. Now I realize she was trying to warn me about inherited trauma. Among Rose's papers, Sarah found something unexpected, a letter written by Giuseppe Castellano himself, dated 1927, 1 year before his death. It was addressed to Rose but apparently never sent. Lisa had already had it translated from Italian. She handed Sarah the translation. My dearest Rosa, I am an old man now, dying slowly, and I must write this even though I know you may never forgive me. When I arranged your marriage to Robert Howard, I told myself I was securing your future. I told myself many lies to cover the truth. I sold my daughter to save my business. I was drowning in debt. Men came threatening violence, threatening to burn down the studio, threatening to harm your mother and sisters. I was terrified. When Howard approached me through intermediaries who knew of my troubles, I saw a solution. He would pay my debts. You would have security. Everyone would benefit. I convinced myself of this, but I knew the truth even then. I knew because of that photograph. Do you remember? March 12th, 1910. I positioned the lights. I adjusted the backdrop. I told you to stand beside your new husband. And I saw your face. I saw you crying beneath that veil. And I made a choice. I could have stopped. I could have told Howard the wedding was off. Instead, I took the photograph. I used the thickest veil I owned. I made sure the lace completely obscured your face. I told myself it was about modesty, but Rosa, we both know why I did it. I hid your tears because I could not face them. I hid your youth because it revealed the transaction for what it was. I created a photograph that looked respectable, traditional, and in doing so I documented my own sin while hiding the evidence. Sarah's voice cracked. She paused, then continued. The photograph has haunted me every day since. Sometimes customers see it and compliment the composition. They don't know what they're really looking at. They see a wedding portrait. I see a crime scene. You have barely spoken to me since 1910. I understand. I deserve your coldness. I deserve worse. But before I die, I want you to know that I have regretted it every single day. The business I saved, it has brought me no joy. Your mother has barely spoken to me with warmth in 17 years. I destroyed our family to save my business. With eternal regret, your father. Lisa took a deep breath. Rose kept this letter. That must mean something. Marcus nodded. Victims often need acknowledgement. The perpetrator admitting what they did can be part of healing, even if forgiveness isn't possible. Sarah sat in her apartment that evening, surrounded by Rose's letters, Catherine's journal, and Giuseppe's confession. The wedding portrait stared back at her across 114 years. Lisa had given permission to make the story public. Rose wanted it remembered, Lisa said. She wrote that explicitly. This isn't just history, it's a warning. Sarah began writing, letting Rose's own words carry most of the weight. She reached out to the Philadelphia Museum of Social History, proposing an exhibition about child marriage in American history, using Rose's story as the centerpiece. The curator, Dr. Helen Rodriguez, was immediately interested. This is exactly the kind of history we need to preserve, Helen said. Too often we sanitize the past. Rose's testimony makes the reality undeniable. They planned the exhibition carefully. The wedding portrait would be displayed prominently, with Rose's letter describing what was hidden beneath that veil. Giuseppe's confession would be shown alongside the photograph he took. Catherine's journal would provide intergenerational perspective. 3 months later, the exhibition opened. It was titled Behind the Veil, Rose's Story and the Hidden History of Child Marriage in America. Opening night was packed. Lisa attended with her family, visibly emotional. My great-grandmother wanted this story told, she said during her speech. For 70 years, she carried this secret. Now, finally, her truth is public. Rose was not just a victim. She was a survivor who built a life despite everything stolen from her. Tonight, we honor her courage. Visitors moved through the exhibition, many crying. Some stood in front of the portrait for long minutes, trying to see through the veil with knowledge of what it hid. Comment cards filled with reactions. I had no idea child marriage was legal in America so recently. My grandmother was married at 14 in 1925. I wonder what her story was. Thank you for telling Rose's story. We need to remember this. A high school teacher brought her students. Sarah overheard one teenage girl say, "She was our age, 15. Can you imagine?" The friend shook her head, tears in her eyes. I can't, but she lived it. That was the point, Sarah thought, making the unimaginable real, giving Rose's silence a voice. 6 months after the exhibition opened, Sarah received an email from Angela Romano in Pittsburgh. I think Rose was my great-aunt. Angela explained that her grandfather, Anthony Castellano, was Giuseppe's younger brother. Family legend said Giuseppe had a daughter who married well, but we lost touch with that branch. After seeing coverage of your exhibition, I realized married well probably meant something different. Sarah connected Angela with Lisa, and they reconstructed the Fuller family tree. Giuseppe's decisions in 1910 had fractured the family in ways that echoed through generations. Rose's siblings had distanced themselves from Giuseppe, uncomfortable with what he'd done. Angela had found letters between Giuseppe's wife Maria and her sister, written between 1910 and 1915. Maria had tried to stop the marriage. She had argued with Giuseppe, gone to their priest, even contacted Robert Howard directly. But in 1910, a wife had no legal power to stop her husband's decisions. One letter read, I have lost my daughter. not to death, but to something worse, to a life she never chose. Giuseppe says I should be proud Rosa will live in comfort. But I would rather she lived in poverty with freedom than in luxury as a captive. The exhibition traveled to other cities. Each location added local stories. The conversation expanded beyond Rose to become a national reckoning. Most importantly, Rose's testimony contributed to advocacy efforts. Activists used her letters in legislative hearings, reading her words to lawmakers considering bills to close legal loopholes still permitting child marriage. On what would have been Rose's 130th birthday, Lisa organized a memorial service at the cemetery. They added a second marker, Rose Castellano Howard, 1895-1967. Daughter, mother, survivor. She was 15 years old and crying beneath her veil on March 12, 1910. She was never forgotten, and her story will not be silenced. Sarah stood at the grave, the wedding portrait in her hands. The thick veil no longer hid what it had been designed to conceal. Modern technology, historical research, and Rose's own testimony had made visible what Giuseppe had tried to obscure. Rose had been right. Truth is built across generations. Rose preserved her testimony. Catherine safeguarded it. Lisa shared it. Now thousands knew Rose's name, her story, her truth. The girl behind the veil was finally seen.